A 20-ton rocket returns to Earth, traveling 17,000 miles per hour in its approach. No one was hurt, but China's reckless handling of the rocket's return is drawing backlash. Vaccine quotas have turned into political performance tools in some Chinese cities. Communities in Shanghai are urging people to get vaccinated, even promising money and coupons as compensation. But some are questioning their motives. And 3 Christian preachers are detained in China. Their arrests come as Beijing ramps up its crackdown on religious leaders. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A 20-ton rocket has just come plummeting back to Earth, traveling as fast as 17,000 miles per hour. Reports say no one was hurt, but scientists are criticizing China's reckless handling of the rocket's return. NTD's Don Ma has more.
A Chinese rocket that's garnered worldwide attention has just crashed to Earth. The spacecraft is around the size of a 10-story building and did not completely burn up in the atmosphere as it fell back to the planet. In a near miss with the U.S., the rocket debris came flying a mere 90 miles above Florida. It was moving at a speed about 17,000 miles per hour at the time. There are varying reports as to where the rocket actually landed. Chinese state media say the debris landed in the Indian Ocean near the Maldives, about 60 miles from inhabited land. On the other hand, the U.S. Space Command confirmed its landing over the Arabian Peninsula, but added it was unknown whether the debris hit land or water. The Chinese rocket first launched into space 2 weeks ago. It's a payload rocket used for delivering a piece of China's new space station into orbit. The delivery was successful, but Beijing's scientists did not build safe re-entry features into its design. As a result, the rocket fell back to Earth uncontrolled. China's handling of its return has sparked widespread criticism. On Saturday, NASA knocked China for not adding controlled re-entry features into its design, saying it's clear that China is failing to meet responsible standards regarding their space debris. But it seems China's foreign ministry doesn't agree with the criticism. On Monday, its spokeswoman defended Beijing's handling of the rocket, arguing that there is no report of harm, and accusing the U.S. and other countries of overhyping the situation. Despite the lack of damage reports, China's actions were a risky one. Harvard astrophysicist Jonathan McDowell said that it appears China won its gamble, but it was still reckless. Famous astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson also chimed in.
If you're going to send things up into space, and you know they're going to come back, you want to have a controlled re-entry, not an uncontrolled re-entry. And it's not that hard to do, and that's not what the Chinese have been doing.
The Foreign Ministry spokeswoman also accused the U.S. of embracing a double standard. She pointed to an American SpaceX rocket that fell to Earth 2 months ago. But the spokeswoman failed to mention that the SpaceX rocket actually had safe re-entry features built in. The spacecraft's crash landing was only because of a malfunction. On top of that, the SpaceX rocket only weighed about 1 ton. Whereas the Chinese rocket boasts about 20 times that weight. The uncontrolled crash may not be China's last. Beijing plans to send up another rocket in a few weeks. And after that, it has 9 more launches planned. Don Ma, NTD News.
Communities in Shanghai, China are urging people to get vaccinating, promising money and coupons as compensation. But some are questioning their motives, as they reportedly have quotas to fill. Here are more details.
Beijing is pushing for mass vaccinations, but what should be an effort to improve public health is prompting questions about ulterior motives. Some have said China's vaccination numbers have become measuring tools used to judge local authorities' job performance. It's caused chaos, as many in China still question the safety of Chinese-made vaccines. And the situation seems to get even stranger in Shanghai, China's largest megacity. Later last month, posts on social media announced a competition between vaccination staff in different regions of the city. Even vaccination stations located inside the same communities were asked to compete for the highest number of vaccinations. A related notice is circulating in Shanghai's Putuo district. It says groups from another district, Baoshan, were driving buses full of Putuo residents into Baoshan communities to get vaccinated. But it didn't stop there. They even offered a $50 reward for each person willing to go. The notice also added, if you see this type of situation, please immediately call the police. On top of the Baoshan district stealing vaccine patients from other districts, communities inside the Baoshan district are also competing with each other. One netizen described an example of this online. He talked about his friend who was at first meant to receive the vaccine from his company, but instead a bus came and took them to a different station in Luodian. What's more, a Shanghai resident told us that people in her area are paid to get the vaccine.
If you take the vaccine as a member from our company, we will pay you $80. You take the vaccine using my ID, I will pay you a certain amount. It's like this.
Miss Lee also described another practice, schools vaccinating students without notifying their parents.
These poor kids, they don't know to fight back and can only listen to their teachers. Teachers say it's all right and notify parents only after they give students the shot.
Another Shanghai local says in order to meet their vaccination quotas, community staff members have to compete for vaccine patients.
They may try all sorts of ways to attract people in order to meet their quota. I heard some give out free eggs and give out all kinds of coupons.
The situation has become so crazed that Mr. Zhang told the Epoch Times that the vaccination quota has become political. He described a recent conversation he had with a local policeman.
The policemen, those insiders, vaccination is a political mission for them. They have to take it. Policemen and public servants, these people are forced to take the vaccine.
But the chaos has sparked doubt over the safety of the vaccines. Some have suggested the regime's huge push for Chinese vaccines may reflect quality problems.
Chinese authorities have never announced the side effects of Chinese-made vaccines. But in the past 2 months, Chinese netizens have revealed cases of serious post-vaccination side effects and even deaths. Authorities have deleted these posts on social media shortly after they were published. Police even detained or warned some of the netizens. They detained one of the netizens in Nanjing City for 7 days in April. That's after the netizen posted about a post-vaccination death. Despite the censorship, Chinese netizens and international media have disclosed at least 5 cases of post-vaccination deaths. These people all died a couple of days after getting the jabs. They include young, healthy people. Local media didn't report any of the cases. And there's no investigation into whether these cases are related to the vaccines. The World Health Organization is calling for pharmaceuticals to share their CCP virus vaccine patents with poor nations that are struggling to deal with the virus. Biden's on board with the proposal. The argument is that these poor nations would then be able to manufacture more vaccines. But the counter-argument is that patents are what drive research and development in the first place. So if we take them away, we might be undermining the path to future vaccines.
Drug makers on Thursday said President Biden's support for waiving patents of COVID-19 vaccines could endanger their supply chains, and that wealthy nations should instead share more. Biden on Wednesday threw his support behind a waiver after India and South Africa proposed to the World Trade Organization that pharmaceutical companies share their intellectual property rights to COVID-19 vaccines. India is the home of the world's biggest producer of vaccines, but it still has a major shortage during this devastating second wave. A vaccine expert advocates for more doses and explains the challenges poor countries face.
What we really need is very large numbers of doses without them costing too much. And some of the vaccines at the moment that are being used in the US and in Europe are really out of reach in terms of their cost for many of the countries in the world.
The WHO says just 7 out of every 100 vaccines studied in a lab actually make it to clinical trials. A pharmaceutical professor explains that there are simple protein vaccines that can be made in a lot of countries, and there are complex vaccines, including RNA, that can be only made in a few places.
The protein-type vaccine technologies, which have been used for really quite a long period of time, could be made locally in a multiplicity of different countries, whereas these more technical vaccines, the viral vector vaccines and the messenger RNA vaccines, are really, really new, and the numbers of manufacturing sites capable of making those is really rather low.
The counter-argument to waiving vaccine intellectual property is that the patents allow companies to invest money into researching new vaccines. A patent attorney argues there may be less incentive if the patents are waived.
And you would not have this kind of investment if there wasn't a proper reward for these companies. So the patent system was invented for this system, and I think if I may say so, a bit silly to try and reinvent it now.
Pfizer and Moderna stocks dropped even at the mention of patents being waived. The two companies combined forecast a total of over $45 billion in sales this year for their vaccines.
Some U.S. officials are fearing that waiving vaccine patents would help Beijing save years of research and catch up with the U.S. in biopharmaceuticals. This amid tensions between the West and Beijing surrounding the origins of the CCP virus. A senior Biden administration official admitted that the priority is saving lives. But at the same time, the U.S. would want to examine the effect of a waiver on China and Russia before it went into effect to ensure that it's fit for purpose. Another question is whether or not the big pharmaceutical companies are willing to give up their trade secrets. They include things like temperature and growing conditions in the manufacturing processes. Companies such as Pfizer and Moderna own these trade secrets themselves. Unlike publicly accessible patents, these trade secrets belong to the company's intellectual property. BioNTech also weighed in on the vaccine patent waiver debate today. It says there is no need to waive the patents because manufacturers will be able to produce enough shots for the world over the coming year. And EU leaders are skeptical about the U.S.'s proposal to waive IP rights for the vaccines. Some say the U.S. should export vaccines like many European countries have done. NTD's Patrick Hayden takes a look.
European leaders are raising doubts over the United States' proposal to waive intellectual property rights for COVID-19 vaccines.
I made it clear that I do not believe that giving away patents is the solution to make vaccines available to more people. If a patent is given away and the quality is no longer controlled, I see more risk than chance.
Merkel says waiving IP rights could jeopardize the quality of the shots. Currently, the US is following legislation that vaccines will only be exported when enough have been created to inoculate the country. The UK doesn't export either. Merkel, French President Emmanuel Macron, and the EU's executive arm, the European Commission, say the US should lift its export ban. Macron says he calls very clearly on the US to end export bans not only on vaccines, but on ingredients in those vaccines. He supports the lifting of IP rights in a limited way. The Financial Times reports an unnamed official saying that access to patents is not the same as acquiring the knowledge to make a vaccine. The official added that you also need the technical know-how to make the vaccines. About 80 to 100 patents are involved in the creation of an mRNA vaccine. Spain, India and South Africa are in support of waiving the IP rights. Patrick Hayden, NTD News, London.
Beijing's crackdown on religion isn't letting up. Local police reportedly arrested a Christian preacher from Beijing's Zion Church last week. Her name is Huang Chunzhi. Rumors say she'll be detained for 10 days. But the information isn't confirmed. The police didn't inform Huang's family that she was taken into custody. When her family later called the police, officers refused to explain why they detained her. The timing of Huang's arrest has also spurred on other questions. She was taken while the Zion Church was occupied with a separate issue, rescuing another of its preachers. Police had apprehended preacher Xi Jiafu in the middle of the night just days before. They later informed his wife he would be detained for 10 days. That's over what authorities called illegal gathering charges. Zion Church is the largest Christian house church in Beijing, but the situation isn't limited to Beijing. In South China's Guizhou province, one preacher has been the focus of a crackdown since March. Zhang Chunlei is an elder member of Guiyang Ren'ai Orthodox Church, but he's now in criminal detention for what authorities are calling suspected fraud. His sentence was announced at the beginning of May after he endured nearly 50 days of administrative detention. His lawyer calls the accusation ridiculous because Zhang's church does not host any activities related to money. Beijing's updated regulations on clergymen are more rigid than ever before. They expressly state that clergymen shall embrace the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party and shall practice core values of socialism and practice the sinicization of religions. Just a day after the new regulations came into effect, some preachers reportedly started talking about the original intentions of being a Communist Party cadre in church. The regulations officially came into effect on May 1st. Many from religious communities are strongly opposed to them. 7 out of 10 Chinese citizens believe Communist China is sufficiently democratic. This is according to a survey by a Europe-based organization. The Alliance of Democracies Foundation published their Democracy Perception Index for 2021 last week. The index is the world's largest annual study on how people perceive democracy. The survey shows 71% of Chinese respondents think today's Communist China is democratic. U.S.-based Chinese human rights lawyer Ten Biao says the survey shows how successful the CCP's brainwashing is. Generations of CCP leaders have said that Chinese democracy must have what they call Chinese characteristics. Former communist dictator Mao Zedong first came up with the phrase the democratic dictatorship of the proletariat. The idea is to divide Chinese people into groups and to apply democracy to the so-called proletariat, while applying dictatorship to the so-called class enemies. The CCP incorporated the phrase into the Constitution in the 1950s, and they mandate Chinese schools teach it. The Chinese regime is working to boost its domestic chip-making capabilities to combat U.S. sanctions, but a new survey says some Chinese chip makers are falling way behind. Findings show that most of China's products are 2 to 3 generations behind the world's cutting-edge technology. Japanese newspaper Nikkei conducted the survey at Shanghai Semiconductor Expo in March. Out of over 20 manufacturers taking part in the event, 7 responded to the survey. Many say their main products are 14 to 28 nanometer chips. Some are making even older generation products. A member of a Beijing chip maker says the company is mostly making 28 to 40 nanometer chips. A nanometer is 1/1000th of a meter. The shorter the length, the more powerful the chip. You can find these microchips in essential parts of laptops, smartphones, and tablets. The most advanced chips today are 5 nanometers or shorter. A European manufacturer is set to sell printer models designed for 3 to 2 nanometer chips. Many Chinese chip makers say U.S. sanctions make it difficult for them to get parts from abroad. Last year, the Trump administration added China's top chip maker, SMIC, to an export blacklist, along with a number of other military-linked Chinese companies. To boost domestic supply, the Chinese Communist regime invested in semiconductor projects across the country. The goal is to source 70% of chips from manufacturers inside China, but many projects are failing. Now we turn to South Asia. Since 2015, China has been quietly building 3 villages on a neighbor's land. That neighbor is a country called Bhutan, and it's slightly larger than the size of Maryland. Bhutan sits in a unique position. It's stuck between China and India, 2 of Asia's power players. News outlet Foreign Policy reports China has been doing construction in northern Bhutan. That includes 3 villages, 5 military outposts, and 7 roads. So far, at least 100 residents have moved into the villages, and Beijing isn't being shy about the move. State media reports show photos and videos of party officials visiting residents in the new villages. But they omit one key detail, that the land is part of Bhutan's territory. Bhutan has so far stayed silent. A Bhutanese political commentator says as a small country stuck between 2 giants, Bhutan's tactic is to avoid unnecessarily antagonizing either side. But for Beijing, seizing the land doesn't seem to be its ultimate goal. The regime appears to be after something more important. China's construction surrounds an area called Bail, and Beijing has been using its claim of the area as a bargaining chip since the 90s. Here's Beijing's offer. If Bhutan gives Beijing a big piece of land in its west border, then Beijing would give up its claim of Bail. That piece of land on the west is crucial for Beijing, as it could give the Chinese regime an upper hand in its military competition with India. The area sits close to one of India's weak points, a narrow strip that connects its mainland to the northeastern territory. India calls the area Chicken Neck. But negotiations with Bhutan haven't gone well. The Chinese regime has been pressuring Bhutan in different ways for years. It's already sent soldiers across the border and built roads across the border. Beijing seems to be upping that pressure even more in recent years. But Beijing's strategy with Bhutan is not unique. The regime has used similar tactics on other disputed territories too. China has similarly built villages on disputed lands with India. And in the South China Sea, Beijing built artificial islands on reefs claimed by Vietnam and the Philippines. That's despite Communist Party head Xi Jinping having promised President Obama he wouldn't do that. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow. In the next episode of our special report, we look at what's going wrong with U.S. carmaker Tesla's love affair with China. Once a darling for the Chinese regime, Tesla is now facing an unprecedented attack from Chinese regulators and state media.
They do this every single time.
The better Tesla's development, the more nervous the Chinese regime will become.
And what does the saga have to do with the Chinese Communist Party's ambition to dominate the next generation of technologies? To find out, watch our episode on Epoch TV this coming Friday.